Is the holiday season the busiest time for your business? Well, it is for mine. And so I'm going to share with you a little bit behind the scenes of my business, how things went, both good, bad, ugly challenges that I experienced in the holiday season. Because I think it's good to look back and see what worked, what didn't work, and what lessons can we learn. Because 2020 has been certainly an interesting year, to say the least, or had been an interesting year. I'm recording this in February of 2021. But let's go ahead and get into it. I'm going to share with you basically how I turned we'll call it a $71,000 month into about $112,000 month. So that extra 40K in revenue, I will share with you how I did that. And, potentially there's some lessons that you can apply into your business as well. So let's go ahead and get into it. So, in this video, we're going to be talking about how I turned a $71,000 month into about $112,000 month, as I mentioned there before. And basically, one of the things about the holiday season, just to kind of recap on the holiday time period, is it can be a very exciting time. And, maybe the holiday season is for you the big time period, maybe, back to school or springtime is your busy time period. It just depends on your business, but it's always fun if you have some sort of seasonal nature with upswings in your business, to see those upswings where it's like, in this case, it was up, sales were up from one week to the next, 83%. For me, some pretty big numbers. So I was pretty excited about it. And then, there is kind of that letdown afterwards where it feels like the party's over and you start seeing numbers like drop of sales, 80% down week over week. Once we get past Christmas and start heading in towards New Year's, it's still decent sales during that time period, but it starts to come down. So in this, we're going to be focusing on really that time period leading up to Christmas Eve. And one of the lessons I think we can take, and this is a little bit of a spoiler alert, is that this analogy, which you may have heard from me before if you've been following me for a while, that if you cast a wider net, you'll catch more fish. And so what that really comes down to is the need for diversification. So if you are selling, strictly on Amazon in the US or just on one platform, a lot of times you're just leaving money on the table by not offering your products in other places. And so when you think about, if you have a time period, like let's say the holiday season, where there's a defined time period, or whatever your peak time is, that there's a certain time period when you're going to get the sales, and you got to really maximize it. And so one of the best ways to maximize it is to offer the products you already sell to people in other places. Because if you can find other people in other places, hence more fish, you'll catch more of them and you'll get more sales, more cash flow, more profits. And the nice thing is that's not just during the busy time period, that translates year round. In most cases, where if you start finding other channels, you really can diversify your sales. And I think one of the things that 2020 taught us is the need to diversify. And so if you're selling on Amazon, you may be familiar with what I'm going to talk about here. So basically, this is an article that was on CNBC. My buddy Stephen Pope from My Amazon Guy, which you may have seen the episode of my podcast where he was on. And, he talked about, there was that hard cap limit of 200 units. He was quoted as talking about in that article. And, for a lot of folks, if you didn't have sales history to back it up, they'd only let you do 200 units at a time. And sometimes they're even giving conflicting information. So if you can imagine on the homepage of Seller Central, when you're starting to run low on a product, sometimes there's that little widget, I think it's in the upper left-hand corner, at least it seems to be on mine, where it tells you like, okay, you've got 5 days left of stock, or whatever the case is. And we recommend you send an X number of units. And so I remember there was one product, it's like, you needed to send in another 400 units. I'm like, oh, okay, great. So then I go to, I had the stock. I go to create the order, and unfortunately, it wouldn't let me, because when I get to the other page, the inventory limits came into play, and it was telling me I was like 300 units over on the product. I'm like, where are they coming up with these numbers? Where one algorithm is telling me send lots more stuff in, another one is telling me you've got too much in the warehouse. And it was like the one that said you need to send more in was really the one that was more accurate. So it got to be a little hairy, and I did lose some sales because of that. But, sometimes you just got to roll with the punches on things like that. So, back to this, I think what this teaches us is the need to diversify off of just Amazon in the US. I think if you're just on Amazon in the US, you're leaving money on the table. And one place that people oftentimes start thinking of is like, okay, how do I get off of Amazon? Now, one of the things I've learned about some of these other channels is you can spend a lot of time trying to figure them out. If you go on, Shopify, it is not just build it and they will come. It is, there's people that are crushing it, but it is a whole different skill set of figuring out, how to drive traffic to it. If you go on some of these other marketplaces, you'll get some traffic. It may not be a lot, and I'll share with you here in a moment what my sales were like on some of these other platforms. And what's interesting here is, if you look at something like jet.com, which it's not even around, but I'd spent about the equivalent of a month figuring out Jet. Back in the days where I had a 9 to 5 job. And, so if I took my 5 to 9 time, so to speak, my side hustle time, and I worked on, figuring out Jet. And really, this is the case with all of them. You have to figure out what is the different terms of service. How do you list things? What are the mechanics of, selling products there? What are the customers' expectations? What's the terms of service like? What are they going to suspend your account for? What can you do? What can't you do? And so you start, spending all this time, and, it might not even be around much longer. And so I was starting to find that, relative to the amount of time I was spending trying to figure out some of these channels, I wasn't getting the results in return for my time invested. And so, like, for example, this is probably my worst holiday season on eBay, but I did make sure that my assistant was going in and making sure I had active listings and we had active inventory. And I made a grand total of one sale on eBay, and for $15.99. So at least I was on the board. So that's a good thing. eBay, I know some people. I was just in a mastermind group last night as I record this, and somebody was talking about how his business, he's crushing it on eBay. And so it's one of those things you don't know until you try. So I'm not down on some of these other marketplaces, but just to also give you a little bit of behind the scenes. So this is Walmart. So I've been trying to figure out Walmart for a while. It's still one that I'm optimistic about of the external non-Amazon marketplaces. It's the one I'm actually the most optimistic about. But just to put in perspective, I did get on the board, and I am going to spend time figuring it out this year. I will say that. So expect some content down the road where I talk about Walmart. But I made, for the time period, basically the 30 days leading up to Christmas Eve, I made a big grand total of $11 in sales. Yes, you read that right. And then on Etsy's one of those which I don't spend a lot of time there. Yeah, they may charge me like $1 a month for like listing fees or something like that, but I tend to walk away with decent money. I don't really have to spend a lot of time on it. A couple of years ago, I tried their ads, and unfortunately, you have almost no control over it. I pretty much found it was maybe you can leave a comment if you know that Etsy ads are better than what they used to be, but it wasn't really giving me results. And I did about $85 in sales. Now, what you'll see there, and I didn't highlight it, is underneath there's a green arrow. It says visits increased 137% compared to the same time last year. Sales were, well, they weren't, I don't think, any materially different. $85 is $85. I'll take it. So, my profit's there, because what I do have on there is a pretty profitable product set. But one thing to notice there is, conversion rate is lower on Etsy than it is on Amazon. I probably should have taken a screenshot of my Amazon conversion rate, because it's always through the roof. It's usually, on some products, it goes, into the 30-ish%. During some time periods, maybe not the entire holiday season, but here it was 3.3% on Etsy. So, hey, I'll take it. Amazon really has done a great job with optimizing conversions, which is a good thing. Shopify, which for my non-Amazon channels, actually did me the best. And there I did whopping $216 in sales, which it's truly just SEO traffic. And I spent no work other than to put stuff into a box. I now have a third-party fulfillment company that will handle those orders for me, or probably most of my orders. I still have a few SKUs that aren't in their warehouse, but for the amount of work I'm going to be doing on this, it's minimal. So hey, I'll take it. And so that, and I've had a few other orders. I think actually I've made more money in sales because of the website on my Shopify store since the holiday season, that I at least make the money to cover my Shopify fees, and then I at least have the presence. So it's not a bad thing. I do think there is value in just having a web presence. It makes your company look more legit to potential customers. And sometimes I think people, maybe Amazon might have been out of a product, so maybe they found it on Shopify, but it's not a big money maker. But hey, I'll take it. And compared to the month before, I was up 767%. So do the math. Must have meant that October to November was not the busiest time period. And then here, this is really where my bread and butter is on Amazon. So here I did, this is where I was making, if you add up those highlighted numbers there for North America, Europe, and Asia, I did a grand total of $112,000 on Amazon across all marketplaces. Now, when I said it before, how I turned $71,880.73 into $112,718.81, that difference is my international sales. And so you can see there, if you were to add all those up, it would be a 56% bump on top of my US sales for that 30-day time period leading up to Christmas Eve. And so basically you could think of it as about roughly from Thanksgiving to Christmas Eve. So that's your holiday season. So I'll take it. And so let's dive a little bit deeper into what the growth looks like. So just one thing to keep in mind, I'm going to show you some other screenshots here in a moment. These are all in US dollars, and I took screenshots probably within minutes of each other, but I think sometimes certain reports pull data a little differently. So the number here, I mean, it's like within $100 or something like that, but it's not exactly the same of what the sales were, but it's pretty darn close. Now, the nice thing here is 2020 had been a pretty rough year for my business, especially looking back at, like, let's say late March to late April, when it was kind of like, felt like the world was on fire because of, COVID and Amazon's, deciding whether your product is essential or non-essential. And I get it. And they're not allowing more product into the warehouse. But what ended up happening there was I was down at 1.80% year over year for that same time period. And so here it was at least nice to see it was back in the green with some growth. My growth for dollars compared to units was higher for dollars, meaning people were spending on average a little bit more. Is basically what that number is telling us when you compare the dollars versus the units growth, since basically how much the dollars were is a higher percentage growth than the growth for units. Hopefully that makes sense. Now, looking in Canada, now this is in Canadian dollars, so it's not total easy to compare, but when it does compare year over year. And so the growth is, into multiple double digits year over year for the same time period. One thing you'll notice here is if you compare the drop off, it's a little steeper, a little sooner in Canada. And that's because I started running out of product. When you start getting to the point of, units wise, you're up 25% year over year. And I wasn't sure what to expect, to be quite honest. I thought it might be one of those things where I was going to, maybe get back up to flat from year over year. Cause, it was just probably a little bit of head trash because it had been rough at some points of the year. So, this was really nice to see that, sales were up even more so in Canada. And I truly believe my sales, had I not run out of some of my popular products, this would be an even higher sales number. In fact, I had shown in a webinar I was on, kind of midway through, and so the screenshots I had taken were fairly live. I mean, they weren't like live in the moment. They were no more than like a day or two old, and this was mid-December. And back in the other screenshot I was showing, I was up. My international sales were a 56% increase on top of my Amazon.com sales. Well, in this webinar, it was 65%. So it was an even higher impact of having the international sales channels until I started running out. But either way, it's still a win. So I'm not complaining any way, shape, or form. Now in the UK, it was even better as far as the growth. And notice here, it was the same thing in Canada. You might notice where the unit growth versus the dollar amount growth is higher, meaning people are spending higher amounts per unit. And same story again in the UK. And the UK, the growth of both units and, well, there would be pounds because, British pounds is their currency. It was up even higher as a growth than it was in Canada. And Canada was a win. UK was an even better win, especially when you compare dollar for dollar growth. And then, oftentimes people ask me about Australia. Hey, I'll take it. I'll take extra money. Why not? I've spent very little time focusing on Australia other than, I don't think I'd sent an inventory for about a year. And there you can see, the units versus dollars. People are probably spending a little bit on less on average for products, but when you're talking about 1,000% growth year over year, I will take it all day long. Now, that was one of those, to be completely honest with you, is you can't really fall off the floor if you've ever heard that statement, because I had just launched right before the holiday season in Australia. So it's not telling the full story to say, oh yeah, I'm just up, year over year, 1,000%. But Australia, really point being, Australia is a growth market. And so Australia is, I think, less than 3 years old as a marketplace, or it's around there at the time we're recording this, as I understand it. So, it's one of those things that you can stake your flag there. I would say, if you are going to go internationally, go with Canada first and then the UK. Canada is much simpler logistics. UK, it's you'll probably have more sales, but your profit margins will likely be a little bit less. Canada is a great one to get into. And then as time goes on, maybe start looking into Australia. Although, as you can see, relative to the year before, the sales were great from a growth perspective, but, units and dollars were not huge numbers. And so I want to say that if you compare that, it was like almost 2,400, 2,300 and some change Australian dollars in sales there in Australia. That's about 1,800 US dollars, if I remember correctly. So it's one of those, like, for the amount of work I'm doing, why not? Like, let Amazon fulfill the orders, and I'm just getting another disbursement from another country. So I'll take it. So now you might be saying to yourself, is now a good time to sell internationally? Well, there's that saying that the best time, if you wanted to shade, to have planted a tree, your best time to have done that would have been 20 years ago. The second best time is now. So if you're thinking about selling internationally, now is definitely a time to do it. You can download a free step-by-step checklist, which will walk you through how to sell globally on Amazon by going to internationalchecklist.com. And I'll make sure to also have a link to that down below. I would love to know, how was your holiday season? What were your lessons? What did you take from it? So for me, I will definitely say, my biggest lessons are, continuing to diversify. That's one of the reasons why I'm passionate about helping others diversify into other marketplaces. And again, you can download that. The link will be down below. If you found this video to be helpful, please consider liking this video and subscribing to this channel. And again, feel free to leave a comment and let me know your thoughts. Maybe you had a completely different experience. Maybe the holiday season is not good for you. Maybe it's great for you. Maybe your peak season's another time. Maybe you had completely different lessons. I'd love to learn it. And I know that one of those things is, as we share information, I truly believe it's one of those things that the rising tide will lift all ships and we can all do better out of it. So I'm going to wish you the best in your e-commerce journey. Take care.